Greetings, comic friends. It is time for another episode of Tales from the Vault, where I jump into my vault of comics, pull one out, and talk a little bit about it, either its general history or its meaning to me. So today, I'm going to do another big one. That is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1. This is a first print. I mean, you know what this is, right? Turtles are very, very hot right now. A huge resurgence with not just the collector's boom that's been happening in the last year or so, but with when Last Ronin hit, it just really increased the visibility and interest of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in general. This book, not this particular copy, but this book in general, man, it skyrocketed. I'm glad I got it when I did. A number of years ago, I had purchased a full run of TMNT Volume 1, but the #1 was a third print, and the #2 was a second print. I had replaced the second print with a first print, and then eventually replaced the third print of #1 with this. I think I had gotten this maybe a couple of years ago, and since then it has at least doubled in value, which is insane. This actually jumped over my previously highest valued book. Right? My highest value book was my Amazing Fantasy 15, which was at a 2.0. This was a good amount below it in value. It has now surpassed it in value. Kind of strange, right? That this book from 1984, given it's a much higher grade, but still is worth more than the first appearance of Spider-Man. Kind of crazy. This book to me is, it's not this particular copy that's meaningful to me, but it is having this book is meaningful to me. And again, it's not just because of value. I was thinking about what kind of video I wanted to do today. I initially was going to, I don't know, my head wasn't in a great place. I was going to go on this rant about the collector's market right now and what's going on and how it's sort of affecting me as a collector. And one of the things I was going to talk about was TMNT #1. And I thought, you know what? Instead, I'm going to try to keep it a little more positive. That video might still come out at some point, but I'm going to keep it a little more positive and do a Tales from the Vault on the TMNT #1. Instead of complaining about it, let's point out the things about this book that are important to me. So we have to go way back to when I was a little Titan. Way back in the late 80s. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started becoming a thing. Not the comic, but the cartoon and the action figures and things like that. Which I had a friend or two that had brought some to school one day, and I was just instantly like in love. Like, what is that? Like, before I had stuff like He-Man and or Masters of the Universe, wherever you want to say, maybe a handful of Transformers. I didn't have a whole lot of toys growing up as much as some other kids, I think. Maybe some Mask here and there. But I really latched on to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and unbeknownst to me at the time, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was my very first comic book property love. I had no idea about the comic itself. I didn't know it was a comic. It was a TV show. I was, 7, 8 years old at the time. I just loved the colorful characters, the wacky characters. At the time, the toys were there were the Turtles, there was April, there was Shredder, some foot soldiers, maybe Rocksteady and Bebop were in that first that first run. I can't quite remember who was on the first run of figures, but I loved them and I wanted them all. And this is also when I was starting it into when I was getting allowance and had buy toys with my own allowance by doing chores and things like that. But for those of you that weren't around at that time, like TMNT was huge as a children's property, not as a comic property. I actually can't really comment on how well it was doing as a comic property because I had no idea about it. I didn't really understand the concept of comics and comic shops and stuff like that. It was just, I didn't have that connection. It was just this cool show in toy line. Man, and what a toy line. What a great gimmick, right? This mutagen. You apply it to a person or an animal or people and animals, and boom, you have a brand new character. So the potential for a toy line was just infinite, and you could tell by any sort of animal you could think of, they came out with a toy, a humanoid version of that animal, either as good guys or bad guys or whatever. So there was always new stuff to get. They came up with all kinds of variations of the turtles themselves. There's the vanilla of the turtles, but then they came out with ones that transformed into like actual turtles, into the TMNT turtles, vehicles, all kinds of stuff, mashups. It was crazy, and you couldn't go anywhere without seeing turtle stuff. Cereal, Hostess pies, which I miss to this day. I would love to get. Oh man, they were vanilla filled with this green frosting all over them. Usually came with a Turtles card or a sticker. There were movies, like live action movies. It was great. The comics, again, as far as I know, we're doing fine, but it was the more public-eyed property that did well. And before, I had these. I was into Masters of the Universe as much as someone of that age could be. Like, yeah, the toys are cool. I know that I watched the show, but I don't remember watching the show of Masters of the Universe. I remember watching TMNT. And my best friend at the time was really into it, so we both got into it together. This is the same friend that got me into comics proper, where he was really into X-Men and kind of introduced me to the Marvel Universe through Marvel cards. So I owe that to him as well. But being my first real property that I fell in love with, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Again, at the time, didn't know it was a comic, and at that time, like it is today, right? A character gets hinted at being in some sort of movie, TV show, cartoon. It doesn't matter. The expected value of that first appearance of that thing skyrockets. I don't think it was really like that then, right? There wasn't really that connection between a popularized property that came from a comic and the comic itself. It might have created some awareness about the comic property, but I don't think it really spiked the value of comics, because back then there wasn't like this huge comic market. The demand wasn't there. The supply, for the most part, was there. I mean, you think about this, and I hate thinking about this. I'm how do I put this? I'm older now than what Spider-Man was when I was born. Right? When I was born, Spider-Man was like 20 years old. That's it. That's bananas. So in when this came out, Spider-Man wasn't even 25 years old. It would have been 23 years old is all. So that collector's market wasn't there as much. It wasn't as in much demand because a lot of people had that stuff who've been collecting for a long time because they were there since the beginning. And the supply was still kind of around because the demand wasn't as high for it, so they were still floating around. You could go to a comic shop and see an Amazing Fantasy 15 in the 1980s, and it's like, whoa, it's cool. I don't want to spend $200 on it. I mean, could you imagine spending $200 on like an Amazing Fantasy 15? Like, it's mind-boggling now. So if I would have made that connection, that there was this other sort of, or would have known that there was this other sort of venue for getting turtle stuff, I probably would have had this. I probably would have gone out and maybe searched it out, but I didn't know. But I made up for it later. So aside from it being really this like sort of really valuable, important book to have in any comic collection, it holds a special place in my heart because of what it is and the characters and how meaningful they were to me, especially in my formative years of, well, man, late elementary school, like going into middle school, really. Man, I held on to Turtles for a long, long time as sort of my main sort of this is the thing that I love. I remember playing with the figures. All my allowance went to figures and getting stuff for Christmas for like vehicles and stuff. Making up little board games, when I didn't have people to play with, and I just wanted to do more turtle stuff. I'd make up my own like board games and stuff. It was when I grasp onto something, I grasp onto it like I'm all in. And TMNT was definitely the first of that. So getting this book and getting it in a first print to me is it's right up there with having an Amazing Fantasy 15, Fantastic Four 1, and some of those big ones. And even before this particular book totally exploded, it was that important to me. When I put a personal importance on a book, it isn't so much about value. That's a separate sort of importance that I always keep in mind. But for me, having this book was of a very, very deep personal importance. Even though I've gone back and I've read this series, it is very little to do with or very little similarities aside from sort of the surface similarities and some of the general themes of the cartoon, which I grew up on and loved, and the characters aren't there and so on. Your two of your main villains, your Bebop and Rocksteady from the cartoon, they never showed up in this series ever. Their first comic appearance wasn't until the TMNT, Teenage Mutant Turtles Adventures, which was based off the cartoon. They never showed up in the first volume of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But this is the origin of that thing that I loved. And don't get me wrong, I love this series as well. Having gone back and got it and read it, this series is great. This is TMNT for Adult Titan now, but without this, my childhood would have been much different. Not knowing that this particular thing even existed, which is weird, right? If this thing didn't exist that I had no idea about, the thing that spawned it that I did know about and love wouldn't have existed, and my childhood probably would have been a lot different. I mean, there would have been something else, right? What is it that if TMNT wasn't there as a child property or a kid's property, what did it push out that would have been? I don't know. Maybe that would have been my thing. I don't know. But I loved animals, seeing these anthropomorphic animals and doing karate and stuff. This inspired me to take Taekwondo. Its influence ran deep then and still runs deep today. So, and it is what it is as an issue that's important to comics in general. It was important then. It's important now as a comic in the comic collecting world. but to me, it is has a deep, deep, meaningful importance, and I love it, and I will never get rid of it, as far as I know. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me know what you think, what your thoughts are. Or do you have a book like this, like something that spawned something that you were into when you were younger, but didn't necessarily? I mean, maybe you knew about it, but you weren't into the original thing. You were into a spin-off, right? Maybe it was like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Like you love that cartoon. You never got into comics, but you love that cartoon. Stuff like that. Or I mean, even Pokemon. Hey, right? Like maybe people are really into, or were really into the Pokemon TV show and card game, but never played the video game. Things like that, which you're into these things that are splintered off of the main thing and sort of take a life of their own, right? The Pokemon card game is as big, if not as big, as the Pokemon video games. I mean, I suppose that's conjecture, but from what I see, I feel that's probably a fair assessment. Which is kind of strange, right? Because it's not what it was intended to originally be, but the thing that it kind of morphed into ended up being more popular. So let me know if you have anything like that, like what Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 is for me. I'd be interested to know. So like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Thanks for tuning in for another Tales from the Vault. Until next time, don't forget to make yours Titan. This video was brought to you by Titan Comic Pressing. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Titan Comic Pressing LLC.